We're going to refactor it this week. All right, excellent. That's what I thought. That's what I thought. What do you mean, am I going to cover the homework? What do you mean getting started doing the layout? I mean, which one are you talking of?
The second homework is rock, paper, scissors.
Okay. Well, how's the layout much different than the dice game? Well, there's no dice, right? There's rock, paper, scissors. So the user has 3 options. Spinner control for those would probably work fine. All right. Have a button that you press to go and play the game. The difference would be that instead of randomly generating a number from 2 numbers from 1 to 6, you'll generate 1 number from 1 to 3, let's say, or 0 to 2. I would do a linear layout. The difference between a linear and a relative layout is linear is just in a straight line. All right, so you have your, well, down or across. You can orient it either vertically or horizontally. Right.
So if you put 3 buttons and you're in linear and it's going across, so one.
Yeah. You go just in a line. They'll either be vertically or they'll be horizontally.
Okay.
All right. So I would use a linear layout. I'd have a spinner control, a button. Then I don't remember exactly what the assignment said, but you could either have a text view where you put the results in, or you could show images of rock, paper, and scissors if you wanted. I don't remember if the assignment required the images or not. It'd be cool if you did that. All right. But you let the user make their choice, press the button, and go from there. I would think it's pretty similar to this. In fact, let's use this as an opportunity to review what we did on the dice game and see the parallels between rock, paper, and scissors. All right?
I've been on the layout today and trying to figure out a little bit more.
Okay. Looking at the resources and looking at the layout. And again, I'll pull this into edit text. Close all these. Yeah, I did. All right. So here's our layout. This is a linear layout. Again, linear layout, the controls are stacked vertically or they're stacked horizontally. What is that? There's an orientation attribute for that. You really don't need any of these if you don't want them. So you could omit those if you don't want them. Yeah. You then would have, again, if you wanted to do it with images, I don't remember exactly what the assignment had, but you could have an image for your choice and an image for the computer's choice. Rock, paper, scissors, just like I have the images for the 2 die. You have a spinner control, same thing, where you pick rock, paper, scissors. You have a button, you'd have the same thing. And then you have a text view where you have the result. So your layout could be almost the same as this guy's layout is. All right? And the layout could say, you know, you won, you lost, you tied. Okay, so the physical layout for this could be the same. All right? So that's the layout of this. Of course, then you're going to have your strings file, which is going to contain all the different string constants that you're going to use. And of course, it is going to be different in your case. But you have the choices, the options of the spinners, and so on. All right. We could do very similar, have a literal for you lost, a literal for you won, and a literal for a tie. And you could have it in here. All right. Yeah. And then you're going to have the activity. And the activity code going to import the package random because you're going to want to use randomization. All right. Import the other packages that you have. Get a listener for your buttoner. Button would be the same as before. Biggest difference between rock, paper, scissors and the dice game will be in the on-click event, because the on-click event you're going to implement the rules of rock, paper, and scissors. Let me pull up the exact assignment so that I am not missing anything. By the way, if I'm not mistaken, I complained over the weekend and they changed the color of the inbox message saying how many you have. Instead of being black font on a blue background, it was impossible to read. They put a black number on a white circle, which of course is easier to read. So that made my day. They did this time. Hey, whatever works, huh? No, not for the college, no. I did some stuff for, they had a CISS. It was like a Students in Free Enterprise. It was a organization. I think I did a little bit of web stuff for them. I'm in the wrong class. All right, create an Android app to play rock, paper, scissors. Allow the user to select their choice using a spinner control. I have a button that calls a method which generates the choice of computer, displays the results of label, display what the opponent selected and whether the user has won, lost, or tied. So I'm not requiring images even, and for an extra challenge, create a Java class that contains the rock, paper, scissors logic. Pardon me?
I didn't know what RTS.
Right, yeah, rock, paper, scissors. Yeah.
For extra challenge or extra credit?
That looks like challenge to me. All right. So yeah, in a nutshell, the dice game should very much be a template for you to follow, an example to follow. The on-click event is going to be really the only thing that's different. Unless you take the extra challenge, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is what we can do as far as that goes. Questions? Other questions? All righty. So, when we look at... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. When we download this here, so we have a folder and
Yes. Yes. No, it actually isn't, because that can be problematic, but you should have, wherever you've created it, there should be a folder. Are you using Eclipse or Android Studio? Okay, like for example, in Eclipse, well, this is going to look different because I'm on a Mac, but it'll look similar in that, like here's my workspace, here's the high-low game. So you'll see underneath it, there's the Android manifest, the assets, the bin, gen. So you'll see that. The folder that has all those folders in it is the one that you want to zip up and send. The executable gets put in, I lied, gets put in gen, I believe, and it will be the APK file. Somewhere. Oh yeah, there we go. APK file. That would be like what you would upload to the Google Play Store or whatever.
Can you run that on your desktop? Well, obviously not on your Mac, but
Probably not. I mean, the emulator is going to use it, but I could, for example, send this file to my phone and run it on my phone.
do you have the ability to email them? Via email?
They'd have to have their device enabled to do that. Yeah, because I've absolutely done that before. Right. Yeah, you should be able to just send the APK file. Yes. Correct. All right. So did that answer your question about the folders? Okay. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to refactor. And again, the whole idea of refactoring, like I said before, is analogous to writing a draft of your paper and then revising it and doing better and so on. And the criteria in code for what makes for a better program really is the maintainability of it and the reusability of the components. There's some other things too. There's fault tolerance. That's a component. In other words, this program may work well if everything is perfect. If you have a great connection to the network and your GPS has a clear shot to the satellite and this is, all these good conditions, but if one of them cracks, if your program can handle it without crashing and burning, then that's another criteria of a good program, the fault tolerance, that it can handle unusual situations. Obviously, there's nothing it can do if there's a resource that needs this down to get that resource up and running, but at the very least, it should accommodate it in a graceful way. All right. Then, of course, you can get into things like the GUI design and things along those lines. Really, given that this is, by and large, a programming class, though, we're going to look at the maintainability and the reusability. All right. The problem with this is, let's imagine that I was writing a string, a set of games, or I even wanted to have one big game that had a whole bunch of different dice games on it. 50 dice games for kids, or something like that. Just simple games. We could do Yahtzee, we could do all these other sorts of games. The problem is all the logic that I've put in that has anything to do with my dice game right now lives in the on-click listener, lives in that on-click method, which means that it would be difficult for me to incorporate this into any other activity. Another example, all right? What if I wanted to, you've seen some of those Facebook games, right? You can play them in your browser or you can play them on an Android device, let's say. All right. It would be great if literally they were sharing components. So maybe you have Java components that live on a server that get accessed via a web page, and maybe you have Java components that are part of an Android app. All right. It's a case of reusability, and we shouldn't have to describe why that's a good thing. It's a good thing because once you have something working, it's working everywhere. If you make an enhancement or a bug fix or anything like that, then everything gets updated. You don't have to go and update the web version and the Android version and this version and that version. Ideally, you should only have to update in one place. So, what we're going to do is we are going to create our own little components. We're going to extend the framework, if you will, all right, so that we have not just code that works, but codes that we could reuse pieces of, all right, if we were writing more dice games. Now again, in this particular case, it's going to be like simple stuff. Like we're going to take and make a class for one die, all right. And there's not a lot you can do with a die, but there's a few things that you can do with it, right? But then we don't have to worry about duplicating that code everywhere. Everywhere we need a die, boom, we put it in there, all right? We don't have to worry about if we decide, if something changes, we had a bug in our random number generator or something, we would have to go and hunt it down in a bunch of places. We could just make the change in one place, all right? The images, knowing where the images live for this, all right, is another example of like, gee, we wouldn't have to put that in a bunch of places and so on. So our goal is to create things that are reusable components that we can kind of become then part of our framework. There's a basic Android framework that gives you all these classes that anyone can build applications with. Assuming in our case that we're a maker of dice games, we can make a dice component that becomes a part of our framework, all right? Or a school can create a student component that is part of their framework, and then they can build on that, and so on. So that's the whole process of this. Now here's the interesting dilemma with refactoring. Kind of like revising your term paper. How do you know when you're done? Okay, when you handed it in, right? So maybe, and again, that's not totally incorrect, maybe you're done on the day that it's due. All right? So in other words, you have until next Friday to finish it. Friday, that's as good as it's getting. I'm turning it in. So yes, there are practical considerations about how much you can refactor, right? I mean, every developer would love to go over their code and revise it and make it better and so on. But, you got to get it out to the world sometime. So there are practical considerations. If you have something that is absolutely due on a certain day, you can't tell your manager, well, Professor Zeller said that I should do, it's like, who's he? Does he sign your checks? No. So why are you worried about what he says? So there are always going to be practical concerns that play into the theoretical concerns, we say. And you always have to balance that, The other thing is sort of like, there's like a return on investment, right? Like, this is like completely unrefactored code. So there's a lot of things we can do to create reusable components fairly easily. Then you might get to a certain point where you're spending a lot of time and making little tweaks that maybe make it a little bit better, but you almost get to the point where the improvement you're making isn't worth the extra time to do it. It's good enough the way it is. All right? We're going to make it easy in this class. All right? How do we know when we're done refactoring? We're going to know we're done refactoring when I say we're done refactoring. All right? So we're going to pretend that I am the one who knows all the practical considerations and return on investments and all that. So in any of these examples, we might look and say we could do this, that, and the other, and you probably would be right. But we're going to do as much refactoring as I think is necessary for getting the points across that I want to get. All right. So the first step in refactoring is trying to identify what pieces of the code are reusable, what are the actors, and I use the word actors loosely, what are the participants in the code that we could possibly make their own component. Knowing that when we're done, we want to have our event handler be very, very, very simple and small. We don't want a lot of code in there. All right, that's user interface code. That's code that's gluing our user interface to the business logic classes that we're going to create. So in this case, what are the players, actors? What's an entity? Some of these concepts are similar in some respects to when you talk about database design. What are the entities in this? The dice. All right. Pardon me? That answer gets a chug, yeah. Now, one thing about classes represent objects. Now, what's the difference between a class and an object? A class is a template that is used to create all the individual objects. So when we create a class, we define two main things. What members of that class know about itself and what they can do. All right? So what can you do with one dice, one die? You can roll it. So that's an activity that you can do with a die. So we're going to have a method on the die that says roll. All right? What does a die know about itself? Well, the number of sides, that's true. I guess, I'm old school here, thinking of only six-sided dice, but I suppose there could be more than that. Yeah, exactly. All right. We're going to assume six-sided dice, but yes, it knows the number of sides. What else does it know? What else does it know?
Are we only going off the six-sided die?
Six-sided die, yeah. It's value. All right. So minimally, we're going to have a die, that you can roll, and that you can ask it its value. All right? Pretty straightforward. And I think we're going to do one more thing, too. We're going to ask it what image represents it. All right? Well, we could return a couple of different things. We could return an image, we could return the string that is the name of the image, and so on. Those are the things that a die can do. Now, what would be another possible actor in this scenario? The game itself. And again, that's kind of vague, but what kinds of things would be in the game itself? Okay. The rules would be encoded somewhere in this class, right? Because what's another dice game? Craps, right? Still, there's two dice, right? But the rules are way different. So there's going to be a class that represents the rules of the game that we're playing. All right? Now, if this was like an advanced OO class, we could talk all about interfaces and this, that, and the other, and how we could maybe create one GUI to do all these games. But we're going to do this in small steps. So at the very least, we could have we're going to have like a game, I hate to say engine, because that's pretty grandiose for the small game that we're creating. But we're going to have a game rules class, all right, the game class itself. Would a pair of dice be a class? Okay. I'm not disagreeing with what you said.
Oh, yes, you are.
No, I'm not. I'm not disagreeing with what you said. How do I want to say? I'm a little concerned with how quickly you came up with that answer. Because you could actually do it either way. All right? You could create because 2 dice is like a common thing in dice games. There's a lot of games where you roll 2 dice. Exactly, yeah. So you could have a pair of dice class that itself contains 2 individual dice. When you rolled the pair, it would roll each individual dice and so on. So that wouldn't be a bad approach either. But you are right in the sense that we're not going to do that today. All right, that doesn't really add a lot of value to this, and it's just a little more extra work. All right, so we have the die that's going to return a couple of things at least. It's going to return its value. We're going to be able to roll it. It's going to return its image. What's going to be in the game engine? Okay. So let's say that's going to be in a method that says evaluate. All right. And what will that method return? Could return a true or false, saying whether you won or not. All right. If we got into the betting aspect of the game, we could return the amount that the person won, because remember there's different odds on a 7 than there is on a high or low, so we could return that. One thing to keep in mind is that a method could only return one thing. All right. It can return a complicated thing, that is, it can return an object that has a bunch of attributes, but it can only return one of something. What arguments is that function going to take? The dice rolls? Well, it needs to know that. All right. What else does it need to know? The user's pick. All right. So I hope I have some paper here because I want to sketch out these classes. We're going to keep this simple, just say if you won or lost. I just read a story, by the way. I don't know, gambling, I guess, made me think of this. Because it's like, I'd keep an eye on these kids. But I read about, there was a child care facility in Russia. These 2 5-year-old kids tunneled their way out of it. Like, dug a little hole and squeezed through the fence. You know, 5-year-old kid ain't that big, so they can squeeze through the fence. And they were found at a Jaguar dealership. It's like, those kids are living the life, aren't they? It's like, and I'm thinking like, that's probably what they were doing, is they were probably playing craps with the other kids for their lunch money, and they accumulated, thousands of rubles, and they wanted to, they wanted to go buy a Jaguar with it. But they did catch them and all that. But someone posted it and said, believe it or not, this is not The Onion. This is an actual news story. Okay. So let's think. The dice object is going to be pretty straightforward. All right? What an object knows about itself is the attributes. So the value of the die is going to be an attribute. All right? The behaviors that a die experiences, that a die can do, is going to be the methods. So the die is going to have one attribute that's an integer, and it's going to be value. The methods are going to be roll, no arguments, no return value, a get value, it's going to return an integer, and maybe a get image that we'll leave this off for now, but it might return any number of different things. We'll leave that off, and we'll address that last. Is there anything else we need to put in a die class other than this? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Pardon me? Yep. Or we actually could have, the roll return the integer that it is. We could do that too. All right. What's the game going to have? Repeat that, please. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So we're going to have a method that says play game. All right. What attributes do the game have? Does the game have? It has 2 dice. We could keep track of the player, and we could keep track. This is where we keep track of like how much money they have. You know, so if we did betting, yeah. So we could have an integer for score. All right. You know, we could have like player name or something like that, but we won't worry about that. All right, is that an attribute of the game? Could be. Could also be an argument to the play game method. Could have a number of players. We're going to keep this simple and just have one player, though. Okay. I think I know what you're saying, like what constitutes high, what constitutes low. Okay, right. That would be an argument to this.
Oh, okay.
User guess. And this is good. Yeah, we're not really playing the computer. And we're going to return a Boolean. A true means that we won, a false means that we lost. And we could actually have this method then update the score if we wanted to. All right? We'll do this bits at a time. All right? We may not get through all of this today, but we'll get through a good part of it today, and then we'll expand on it next time. What does play game contain? Okay, so tell me step by step how you would play this game. What's the first thing you would do? Okay, we're going to get that in as an argument. So when we say play the game, we're going to say, all right, I want to play, and I say low. All right, what happens from there? Roll the dice. So I think I mentioned this in one of my other classes, and I'll mention it here. It pays to do your comments first. All right, so first thing I do is I roll the dice. What's the second thing I do? Pardon me? Yeah, tally the dice. Then what I do is I compare against user's choice, and then finally I return the results. Now here's the interesting thing, and this is like, again, getting to the notion of separating the user interface with the business logic classes. All the user interface needs to know is it's playing this game. The user interface doesn't even really know the dice are involved, right? Doesn't really know the dice are involved. All right? There's going to be no dice living as part of my game. All right? There's going to be dice that are stored in the game class. Okay, so let's go in and let's refactor this. And we might refactor this a little bit at a time, all right, instead of all at once. There's merits to doing it both ways, all right. I'm going to do it a little bit at a time to sort of show the evolution, how it goes. But hopefully we'll end up at a place where we've done everything that we've set out to do. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a dice class. All right. So I'm going to go in here.
Can I throw my 2 cents in?
Sure.
You should copy and paste the entire folder with name of the same thing, but version .1.
Okay.
Version control.
Okay, version control.
Because if you mess it up, then you have to control Z it all the way.
Okay. Assuming I can find this. All right, here we go. Here's my dice game. And I am going to copy it and paste it. I'm going to undo it. Go into this folder. I'm going to paste it. Dice game copy. And I will do dice game V1.
That's it. Version.
All right, version control. Good point. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my dice class. Okay. So I'm going to go in, File, New, Class. Yes.
For refactoring, right?
Yes.
I noticed this.
It's a different kind of refactoring. All right. I'm going to call the class die. It is a public class, which means that the outside world can use it, which you generally want to have. All right. And there's some other options because we're more or less building this guy from scratch. There's really not going to be anything in it but the class itself. So I'm going to click Finish. And boom, there I am. I'm going to put my attributes in here. Attributes, are they made public or private? They're made private. All right. And in the case of inheritance, you could also make them protected. All right. Since we're not dealing with any inheritance here, we'll just talk about private. What does private mean? Private means that the outside world can't access these attributes. All right? Pardon me? Only go through the method to access the attributes. And again, it's interesting this is a dice game because we can think about this in terms of like loading the dice, right? No method should be able to go in directly and set the value of the dice. Right? That's not kosher. You set the die by rolling the die. That's the only way you set the value. There shouldn't be a little cheat in the program somewhere that says if I hold control down when I click the button, it rolls snake eyes every time or something like that, right? So we don't want outside code to have access to these attributes directly. Why? Well, again, forgetting about the sort of cheating example here, if we allow the outside world to directly manipulate them, they could manipulate them wrong. All right? They could set values that are incorrect, and that could cause problems elsewhere in the class. So, for example, you could set a negative value for the hours someone worked, all right, in a week. All right. If you have a method that does the setting of the number of hours someone worked, you can have validation to make sure the number of hours that someone worked is greater than 0. All right. If you allowed someone to manipulate the attributes directly, then you could have code going in that sort of circumvents the validation. And you could directly set the attributes to some bogus value that you don't want to have. All right? So because of all that, we don't let people directly handle the attributes. The analogy I gave in another class would be like plugging in your headphones into your computer. The way that you access the sound card, you're given a very specific way of doing that, a way that isn't dangerous to anyone. All right? Unlike, that's not the same as like opening up and soldering your headphones directly to the sound card, right? That wouldn't be a good idea for anyone. You're liable to mess up things and so on and so forth. Instead, the, quote, interface to that innards of that component is tightly controlled. You got to plug in the headphone in the headphone jack. It's the only way that you can get to it to work. And again, by doing that, you kind of keep it safe for everyone. Someone's not going to plug in something that's going to cause your computer to blow up or going to cause hardware damage when you try to connect it directly to the sound card or something like that. So our attributes are going to be private. All right? Which means that we're going to go through methods to set them and to get them. All right? So I'm going to create private int value. All right? So I've created an attribute. It's a characteristic. Now, another way to say attribute is characteristic. Characteristic of this class is a die has a value. All right? I'm then going to create the methods to roll the dice. Now, these are going to be public, because I want the outside world to be able to do something with these dice, right? Just not manipulate the internal workings of it, all right, by directly setting the attributes. So I'm going to create a public int roll that's going to roll the dice. Because even a public class can have private methods within it. And a good example of a private method might be like an intermediary step in a calculation. Let's say you have a long calculation that you're doing for, you know, some complex sort of math thing. All right? You might want, you know, to calculate it, there's step A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. All right? And you got to do them in that order. And if you do them out of order, bad things are going to happen. Well, you might want to have one method that says calculate. And calculate calls method A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and then returns the result. You'd make that method public, because that's the method that the outside world can use. Those little intermediary steps, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, it might be dangerous for the outside world to be able to call those directly. It might give a misleading result or whatever. So therefore, even though you make the class public, you can still control, well, in this public class, I'm still only going to give access to these couple of things. All right? So I'm going to make another method that says get value. And I'm going to make another method that says get image name. All right. So, what is in roll? Roll is going to have the code to actually do the rolling of the dice. So, yeah.
If you have that imported on your main, do you still have to import it in your site?
Yes. because we're no longer going to need it in the main anymore. It needs to be in the class that's actually using it. In other words, our main activity isn't going to be using random anymore. We're going to move that code into here.
If it inherited it, would it be in there?
Do an imports inherit? I think so. So I'm going to go and get rid of the random from there. All right. And I'm going to go and copy this. All right, here's my class. And I'm going to bring it into text edit so we can take a closer look at it. All right, public class die has a private attribute of value. That's something that it knows. What can we do or ask of a die? We can roll it. So we have the method. What does that method consist of? It consists of generating a random number between 1 and 6 and returning that number. We can also ask what value is the dice currently without rolling it, right? We can do that just as well. And then finally we can ask what's the name of the image that's associated with this. Okay? And it's returning the name of the image, which is D plus the value name. If you remember, the dice's images were D1, D2 through D6. So now, we've taken and we've made this a reusable component. So we could write our dice games and we'd never ever have to write this statement again. All right? We'd just call the roll method on a dice and would know that it magically would do its thing. And we don't need to know the name of the image. We just ask the die, what's your image name? And it will give me that. So, my next step is going to be to change the activity to use the dice class instead of having the code built within it. So, I'm going to say die D1 equals new die. Oh. Got put in the wrong package. So I'm going to move it. There we go. Should be D2. Okay. So what do I want to do about this? I want to roll. All right. So I can say int. I'm going to make this die 1 and die 2. Int I can roll the dice and get the values. So die 1 and die 2 are objects. All right? They are instances of the class dice. So they're specific dice. The die class is the template for all die. This is the behaviors and methods that dice have. Now I'm creating 2 of them, 2 specific dice that I'm going to use in my game. And what do? I roll them. How do I roll them? By calling the method. I then set my variables d1 and d2 to the results when I roll it. Because remember, when I roll the die, that roll method returns the value that was obtained. All right. The total then equals d1 plus d2. And my last step is, I think all I need to do is replace this with die1 dot get image name. Die2 dot get image name. All right. So let me go and let me paste this method into the same text edit where I have the die class. And let's review it a step at a time. These statements here create the 2 instances of the die class. This actually makes the 2 dice. All right? It allocates memory for each of those 2 objects. Again, an object is an instance of a class. It's a member of the class. So I need 2 dice, right? So I create 2 die objects. I need to do this because you need to create an object before you can start using it. One of the most common errors or problems that people run into is they start using an object without creating it, and then you get a null object reference. All right? When you see a null object reference, what that refers to is that you're trying to use an object that has yet to be created. All right? So you got to create it, and this is what creates it. This die simply means that's the name of the class I'm creating. That's the name of the die class that I created, wherever I created it. Yeah, wherever I created it. Die 1 in lowercase represents an object. That's my actual instance of the die. Same thing with die 2. I then call my die roll method, the roll method on the die, and roll the die and store the result in an integer. And I do that for the second die. And then I add those 2 dies together, D1 and D2. All right? I then, no, here's the die. And there's the roll method. There you go. I then do my evaluation like I did before. This code is going to move at some point, right? Because this is still having our business logic or our game logic part of our UI. And that's not good. All right, we want that as cleanly separated as possible. Because what if we wanted to make a web version of this game using JSP pages? All right, we would want to use the same game rules for both. We'd want to use the same Java class. But for now, since we're doing this a piece at a time, this logic can stay here. And the last difference is when we're done, this guy doesn't need to know about the name of the image. It simply asks the die, hey, what's the name of the image file that you have? All right, that represents you. Yes? sure. Absolutely.
File it together with the Java, or?
I'm not really understanding what you're saying.
Got your dice class, and you have images that want to be part of that class
Mm-hmm.
for your dice.
Mm-hmm.
How would you include those? Where would that be?
Yeah, well, again, you could do it a couple ways. You could return the image name if you wanted to. If you want to actually return the image object, probably wouldn't want to do, you could probably do that. Do this part of it. You can return any object. Yes. But for now, keep it simple. We'll return the image name. And then we'll use the GUI to find the image and to display it. All right? You see, I don't know if these things would be accessible within the class. So I'm not saying you couldn't do it, but this seems to be the better place to put that. Now, we should still be working. I'm going to go in and make sure that I change like the version number on here or something so I know I'm running the new version. All right, and away we go eventually. There we can see, maybe. Dice game V2. I pick play. I won. I lost. Seem to have a problem. Not returning the image correctly. Let's see if we can take a look at that. That's okay. It's not working anyhow. Yes, it does. All right, let's. No, I simply used an integer to pull the value from D1 and D2. Die1 and Die2 still has the image object in it. So let's debug this. What I did is I clicked here, setting a breakpoint, which means that as I run it, it's going. I click play. I don't think so. I do think I ran it wrong though, because I said run and not debug. I got a little message there saying it's waiting for the debugger to attach. All right. I hit play. This is kind of launch. It's configured to open debugger perspective when it suspends. Blah, 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 blah. Do I want to open? Yes, I do. All right. So now we can sort of see inside the code. So we can sort of X-ray in the code and see exactly what is going on here. So there's my die class. Die1 get image name. All right, that's where it is at right now, looking at this. And I can go and say, step into. All right. No. All right. Here's showing us our dice. I actually rolled 2 5s. Oh, that's the image view. Dice 1 and dice 2. Die 1 and die 2 is what I want to look at. Value is a 5. The value of that one's a 5. So it is getting that. I'm going to do step into. Gets here. Value is 5.
Oh, you need the two-string value?
Should do the implicit. It was working before. Let's do this. It will make our life a little bit easier. Nope. Let's go and let's put that in a string. String image name equals die1 get image name. let's put in image name here. With my nested function calls, I can't see the actual value that that guy returned. So I'm going to put it in a variable. All right, I'll put my breakpoint there. So now I'm going to go and debug it again. Don't you like how I intentionally make mistakes from time to time so I can teach the class lessons on debugging? No problem. All right, it's firing up. It's probably going to give me that message again. Application is waiting for such and such to attach the debugger, so there's a connection between the two, so I can see here what's going on in the application there. So I go and I pick low, I click play. Same kind of thing. I'm going to say yes, remember my decision. And it'll go here, and it's now looking at this line of code right there. So I'm going to step into that. And return. And actually it tells me D5 is the image name. So it sure looks like it's returning correctly. I'll disconnect and I have to confess I don't know why it is not showing that.
You move the image file over. That's like how you just move it. Yeah,
well, it doesn't really need to move the images over. The images are in here. Actually, the images are not here. Were they under? They weren't under assets. Where were they before? And where did they go? Oh, you know where they went? I moved them. I thought I copied them, but I moved them for my 230 or 243 class. I'll be darned. I'll be darned. So web database integration. So in other words, those are gone. Oh. I think I have another copy of them here. Yeah, there they are. And let me go into, yeah. Repeat, please.
We put it two different ways, so now we get to do it both ways.
Oh, I suppose, yeah. And I put those in the wrong place. Undo.
I'll never understand that copy that working in file sometimes, because like sometimes you like create a new file inside this folder and it completely goes somewhere else.
If you're pointing at the folder in the Mac, that doesn't mean anything. It's the folder that it is showing. So you have to go into the folder show only that folder. Then if you create a new folder, it will create it there. Because if I'm looking, like if I'm like here, and I'm pointing at this folder, and I would say create new folder, I'd expect it to appear in res. It doesn't appear in res. It appears in workspace. Okay, so I don't know if that makes me feel good or feel bad. I guess that makes me feel good, right? It was still working, the code was. It's just that, well, it depends if they were billable hours or not. Yeah. Okay, so now, and there's my dice again. Yay. All right. And everything still works, and the dice are showing and all that. Yay. Yeah. Think of the image view as being like a picture frame. And the image is the actual file. And you could say, I want that file in this frame and in this frame. So yeah, this is not a problem at all. Nope. Nope. All right. Now, dare we try to refactor the last part, or do we leave that until Thursday? Let me talk about that for a minute, because I'd like you to think about what we need to do. All right. The next step. The next step here is, here's what our code is currently. Let's talk about what code is going to stay and what code is going to go. Are the dice going to be part of the on-click event? No. They're going to be in the game class. Is the roll going to be in there? Well, no. If the dice ain't there, the roll ain't going to be there. Is the tolling going to be there? Nope. Will this be here? Yes, because this deals with displaying to the user the image view. What about this? What about this? What about this? Probably not. We might actually have a Boolean in both places, one that gets fed from the object. Is this going to be in here? What's this going to be replaced by? An instance of the game, and we're going to call what on that? We're going to call the evaluate method. And what we're going to pass into that evaluate method, we're going to pass the user's selection, 0, 1, or 2. And then that is going to return a B1 or B lost. Is this going to stay here? The set text. Yeah, to set the text to say you won or you lost. Yes. Why? Well, because depending on the program that we're using this in, we may want to represent you won or you lost a bunch of different ways. Right? In one case, we say you won. In another case, we could run through this statistically, let's say. We could run through 1,000 games and tally up how many times the user has won and lost, and run a simulation to find just how bad your odds are in a game like this. All right? In which case, you're not going to display you won, you won, you won, you lost, you lost, you lost 1,000 times. You're going to run all the instances of the game, and then you're going to display one result. So how the results get displayed to the user is a UI thing. The business logic code, or the problem domain code, or the game code, is responsible for returning simply, did you win, did you lose? And then the UI is responsible for showing how to present that to the user. And then, of course, we're going to do something a little bit different than this. We're going to display it in the GUI, but we're going to get the name different. What I'd like you to do for next time is take a stab, and again, I'll upload the code as it is now, and then we'll make version 3 next week, or next Thursday, rather. I'll upload the code for this. Take a stab trying to create the game class, and that's what we'll do on Thursday. All right? If you're not sure what to do, just download this and review the code and make sure you understand how the dice class works in here. So one of two things. If you think you kind of understand what I did with the dice, try to do the same thing with the game class. If you don't think you understand what I did with the dice, take it and try to review it and see. If you're still fuzzy about the basics of Android, look at the version that I did like last week and review that one. And then try to work your way up to reviewing this one. All right, that's all.